how much interaction do we have with Elon Musk and SpaceX?
One of the most memorable moments for me was our first meeting in Hobart when we were reviewing the space industry capability, and within about the first 10 minutes they said, well, you know that Tasmania does all the deorbit tracking for SpaceX. And I looked at my team and they went, and so as SpaceX, some of the returnable rockets re-enter the atmosphere in some of the orbits, they do that directly over the top of Tasmania. So, and Tasmania is now looking at increasing that infrastructure for full commercial orbit and deorbit tracking, and they use some of the old radio dishes. So SpaceX had found us before we even discovered that. All of the images, by the way, that you see and the movies that you see of the rocket launches are all done with Australian technology, Blackmagic design cameras and post-production editing, which actually every Hollywood movie that you see is also done with both of those, one of our well-known secrets. So SpaceX had been engaging with us, and we certainly want to make sure we continue that partnership to assist them in ways that we can, and I really can't go into much more.
So the next question is, given there have been at least 2 attempts to position Australia in space, what is the difference this time? And will we ensure that this will last more than 2 federal government terms to avoid lost opportunities and talent?
The difference here was actually there was frustration from those 2 failures, and there were people all around the country, many of whom in this room, Brett's here, there were people all around the country who knew that that was not the right answer, and actually that frustration, I think, catalysed a level of focus in the country, and just pushing and pushing and pushing. You know, there was almost a decade of work before the announcement at IAC in Adelaide, so I think it galvanised the community. The second piece is that given that we had not funded, not done perhaps what we needed to do and learnt from that, we certainly noticed when we started the agency, everyone got behind it, saying if we don't get behind it, it's not a given that this will be successful. We've seen that it doesn't always be successful. So I think the second point was that the industry, the researchers, the community, you know, you've heard from Kimberly, you know, even what Geoscience Australia is doing, everyone got behind the effort knowing that this was our chance to make it work. And I think, so in a way we leveraged off that. I think the funding side, we were acutely aware. I think when the agency was announced, we had, you know, operating budget of $4 million a year and a paltry $15 million for the international fund. And before we started, that was actually zero. And I do remember the moment where I said, that is the wrong answer. And I'm not usually just like, seriously? I mean, you can't do the impossible with the impossible. But we didn't limit our vision on the money that we had. And so we always knew if you put a good case to government, we wanted to work hard, put the case to government, just as each of you do in your own environments, and make that case compelling. So I think the other piece is we didn't stand still with the minimal money we had, and we just, you know, kept going. We thought if we could convince the country then can convince the politicians. And so far, so good, but we're on a journey.
Are we training the right number of young people the right way, with the right material?
The young lady who made that drought map that I just showed, who basically invented it in Geoscience Australia, was a graduate 2 years ago, and I was on the selection panel. We selected someone who was numerate, communicative, intelligent, motivated, and wanted to make a difference. Had a great STEM background, had actually already demonstrated that she could go from one field to another. Those people can come into these spaces and do wonderful things. So we are certainly recruiting, training some wonderful people, but we always need more of them. And as I look to somewhere like Africa, where I'm now working, where's the flow of those people coming from? And I hope we can inspire more and more people to study those STEM courses.
One of the things that's been recognised for a long time is that space activity is really inspirational. It is one of the things that catches the imagination of children, young adults, and it has been demonstrated to be a motivator in bringing people into STEM education. And as I'm sure Megan will add, one of the 4 pillars of our new strategic plan at the Space Agency is what we call Inspire. That is bringing the inspiration of space to the general community, and from that, we hope inspiring a number of young people to come into the STEM subjects. There's been a lot of research done in this area out at UNSW in the use of particularly space activities to inspire kids into STEM learning. We're certainly going to need a lot of students with STEM capabilities in the future. We know it's been a problem for many years now, interesting students in taking on the STEM careers. But I think now that particularly, as the space industry in Australia grows, students will not only see the fascination of space to draw them to STEM, but the more opportunities for STEM careers in Australia that hopefully an expanded space industry will help to provide.
Emily.
And the education and outreach aspect is an integral part of what we do at CSIRO. We have a strong education outreach program which extends all the way from children and members of the public. We have thousands of people coming to our visitor centres at parks and CDSCC every year. And then within the science programs that we run and within my program, we are looking at actively involving and training PhD students, bringing in postdocs to work in these new areas. And the staff in my programs, we are regularly sending a number of people to the International Space University to increase the breadth of their space training in particular. So it's a very strong focus of what we do too.
What is a sounding rocket?
A sounding rocket essentially is a small rocket that's capable of carrying a package of instruments high up into the atmosphere, but doesn't have the thrust to put that packet of instruments into orbit. So in other words, it follows a ballistic trajectory straight up over the top of that trajectory and back down to Earth. The earliest sounding rockets were developed in the US just after the end of the Second World War, and they have been since that time a really important tool in researching that section of the upper atmosphere which is beyond high altitude balloons and below satellites.
Right.
They're a lot cheaper, so a lot of countries use them for that reason.
Can you tell us more about the Australian CubeSats launched and planned? Who do I look to for that one?
In 2017, we had 3 university CubeSats as part of the QB50 global ionospheric research program. They were from Sydney University, UNSW and Adelaide University, thank you. So they were the first 3 civil ones. We've had a couple of small defence CubeSats already launched, and there are further planned to support different Australian national defence capabilities. Kimberly, I'm sure, will want to talk about CSIRO's upcoming satellite.
It's our first satellite. It's a capability development, or capability demonstrator. We're hoping it will lead to a future program of more satellites, possibly in conjunction with our colleagues at DST. But I did also want to highlight that I saw Eva Cairns here earlier on. Maybe if he wants to give a wave. He runs the Centre for UAVs and CubeSats at the University of Sydney, so he's an excellent person to talk to if you would like to know more about CubeSat programs. They've got a program of, I think, another 5 CubeSats in the planning.
I'm not sure if this is for our panel or more for Lisa. How do we have to accommodate the phenomena of dark energy and dark matter in nearby space exploration?
The dark matter in the universe is mostly in between galaxies in clusters, and it's also outside of galaxies there's a really large extended halo way outside galaxies, and there's dark matter there as well. But where we are, we don't have to worry about that.
Well, that's reassuring. Okay, I'm just going to finish up with a couple of questions which I think are mostly directed to you, Megan. Will the Artemis plan see people going from the moon base to Mars, or is the moon base just testing capabilities for Mars?
Yeah, good question. So the concept of the gateway is to also be a staging post for future missions to Mars, so to be able to take cargo there and then to be able to launch from Mars. And NASA have indicated that the only timetable they've said is after 2033 they're expecting the Mars mission, so they haven't done anything further than that on the timetable. There's certainly in the Artemis program, first of all, water. So water is absolutely critical. You saw our blue planet, but critical not just for our own usage, but for fuel and oxygen. So the activity to try and extract water from the South Pole, Aitken Basin, some of the deep craters, that's a really important activity to then be able to see if water can be extracted on Mars. There are evidence of seasonal briny water from layers in some of the craters in Mars, so they will certainly want to test that. So the idea is you know, as NASA does, you sort of step up each little piece and check that you can do it. So it will be both to do stuff on the moon, but most importantly, I think the driver is to be able to test those things that we need for Mars. The other piece is we'll be living in an area of increased radiation. So we think of the International Space Station actually still sits within some protection of the magnetic field of the Earth. And so now we're going to move beyond that for human habitation. Gateway will be beyond that, and of course the moon. So we start to deal with what will probably be one of the most significant issues on the mission to Mars. Will actually be managing radiation on the trip and managing radiation on Mars. It's a very hostile environment.
What are current thoughts on how to return to Earth from Mars?
Oh yeah, no, it's funny, there's this sort of built-in that it was one way, but actually all the plans are for returns, and any plan that Australia's involved in, believe me, will have a return. So that's why you often hear the discussions to Mars as saying, well, it'll take us sort of 18, 24 months, and that's because you have a window with the orbit of Mars relative to the Earth to be able to go, so 6 to 9 months to get there. You then have to wait there for 6 to 9 months for that orbit to then return to be favourable to come back. So sort of 6 to 9 months to get there, 6 to 9 months on Mars, because I always thought, why are they going to wait so long until I understood all the orbits? And then 6 to 9 months to come back. This is a significant journey, but I can assure you that one of our values is safe on Earth and safe in space, and we will definitely be looking to bring people back. So.
The final question, which I'll ask each of our panel to comment on, the return to the moon and onto Mars doesn't seem to align with our stated priorities. Manned space is exciting, but should Australia spend valuable resources on it?
I actually think it does align, because if you think of the technologies that we need, precise positioning, we're going to have to test advanced communication. So we're already looking at the work that ANU and CSIRO are doing with advanced communication, laser-based communication. We will need that. When you look at robotics that we use here on Earth, we'll be looking to see if there's opportunities to be able to control robotics from Earth, but also from the gateway, and have the Australian flag on that. That translates immediately back to what we do here on Earth. The human side of health, we know that it's certainly in our early stages. We will have robotic missions. We don't have the capacity yet to go beyond that. We will in the future. But human health and our contribution to that, particularly from our experience in Antarctica, will be a critical part of what we do. And as Adam outlined when we were just sort of chatting, we need a digital Earth Australia for the moon and for Mars, and NASA's very keen about that. So all of those priorities, which are so vital to Australia when we have strengths, are what we are considering to build into our program to Moon and Mars. And there will be just things that we haven't even thought of that will change what we do here on Earth.
Adam, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I've got a split personality on this.
Yes.
So one part of me is that we'll be working with the Space Agency to try and work out how we can interweave things into the Earth observation into the Mars commitment, and so there's a very pragmatic how can we leverage this directly to other things that we know are more close priorities. But there's another part of me that also says that our strength and weakness as an Australian community is how carefully we rationalise everything. Should we do this? Or, well, it might not work. And that stops us, I think, making some really bold steps. And sometimes it's important to go with the inspirational side. I think if the agency can get Australia onto an inspirational footing, moderated by some good reason, then we'll be in a really good place. And I think that's where the community wants us to go.
I do think it aligns with our priorities, and having this Moon-Mars mission, I guess, gives us that inspiring target to aim for, but the technologies that we would be developing have multiple uses. For example, a communication system that you can use to communicate around the moon will also improve the communications, for example, from Earth observation satellites back down to Earth, because a common problem for everyone now is the increasing bandwidth that we need to communicate all the data that we're collecting from all of our fantastic sensors. There's just not the bandwidth to get that down in a useful amount of time. So the developments that we undertake for a Moon-Mars human mission will have benefits elsewhere. For example, the biomedicine, the research that we would be doing in space that will help human missions will also produce outcomes that we can apply to human health here on Earth. We're looking at a project to send a CubeSat to Mars, but we were just talking about CubeSats before, and I should have mentioned that there are a couple of startup companies in Australia, particularly Fleet and Myriota, who are looking at provision of Internet of Things connectivity using fleets of 100 or 200 CubeSats, and the kind of technologies that we are developing to make those CubeSats more reliable at a commercial level rather than just university experimental research type platforms are useful in both of those cases. And our goal is to grow our industry. So as long as we are producing something that leads to industry growth, it doesn't really matter whether it's for a human mission or for other applications. I think it's all heading in the same direction.
Kerry.
Well, everybody else has stolen most of my thunder. But like the others on the panel here, I do think that it does align with Australia's national priorities, our national growth. We've already talked about the potential for spin-offs. People often forget that quite a lot of spin-offs came out of the Apollo program that you would never have thought going to the moon would have enabled the development of different kinds of technologies, a lot of material science, computing developments that came out of that. And in a sense, we don't really know everything that might come out of that is of benefit for Australia and benefit for the wider world. But if we develop those, if it's Australia that develops some of those technologies, then they are most likely also marketable technologies. So they can contribute to the growth of Australian industry, the Australian economy over time. And one of the things that I don't think has really been mentioned, but if we have Australian technology on the Gateway or on the moon or whatever, that's space qualifying it. So then for other space missions in Earth orbit, other areas of the space community, we're demonstrating that we have reliable product that can then be fed into the supply chains of a large number of other space activities. So again, that's something that can grow the Australian economy and obviously grow the potential for high-tech jobs for the future.
Okay, please join me in thanking all our speakers.